You know what app I use on my phone more than any other app, besides the podcast app, to listen to this here podcast? I use onX. onX Maps is the most comprehensive mapping system for hunters on the market today. I use it all the time. When I was in New Mexico, I was looking at 40,000 acres of ranch that I needed to learn. I flip open onX and just start studying the map. When I'm riding trails, I put the tracking app on. It helps me get around in strange country. I could mark water sources, food sources, bear sign, just all kinds of options within onX. You need to check out onX Maps by going to houndsmanxp.com. Click on the link on our sponsor page. You'll go right to onX Maps, and when you check out, enter the code HXP20 and you will get 20% off of your order. Know where you stand with onX. Check out Cajun Lights, your complete dog hunting outfitter. Tracking equipment, leashes, collars, dog supplies, and much, much more. You can find it all at CajunLights.com. And don't forget their outstanding lineup of lights. You can find it all at CajunLights.com. Elite nutrition products are the hottest thing on the market right now for dog and horse owners. And Houndsman XP is a dealer. You can find all their products on our website at houndsmanxp.com. Over the past 5 years, you've tuned into this podcast, and I don't take it lightly. We have built a mutual trust. And when I recommend a product, it's because I believe in it, I use it, and I'm given my seal of approval for that. I'm putting my name on that. And with Elite Nutrition products, I do trust it. I do use it. I've seen great results with their essential dogs, their pre and probiotics, their tick-borne disease treatment. It's all natural. It's a great alternative to pharmaceuticals when used appropriately. If you expect extreme performance, you need Elite Nutrition. Available from houndsmanxp.com.
It's not a how-to book. I would not write that book, and even if I spent a few decades more in the sport, I don't think that that's a book I'm interested in writing. This is, on the question of ethics and philosophy that, well, one, I do think I have quite a bit of a background in that, and that's kind of what I was bringing to the table, is I do not have decades of practical experience in our sport, but I have quite a bit of time in thinking about these sort of ethical and philosophical issues and these traditions in a way that I think a lot of falconers maybe don't, right? And so I'm bringing in a new framework to discuss that.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast, and the guest for this episode, Colten White, is a new author, and he wrote the book, The Philosophy and Ethics of Falconry. Right after he wrote the book, he hit me up and asked if I would be kind enough to review and give it a read through and critique it for him. And in the midst of doing that, I went ahead and proposed the idea that, hey, would you maybe like to go ahead and make this into an audiobook as well? And so he agreed. And he ended up coming over before the end of last season and recording that audiobook with me along with this episode. And we also did some hawking while he was down as well. So it was nice hosting him for a weekend, and it was a really nice, fun, productive venture. And we were both very happy with the result of the audiobook version of The Philosophy and Ethics of Falconry. If you want to pick it up, it's available now on Audible and most of the other audiobook platforms. And if you want, you can also pick up a physical copy at Amazon or Northwoods Falconry or Western Sporting too, I believe. So if you'd rather have a physical copy, you can get one of those there. And otherwise, in the meantime, have fun listening to the conversation that I had with Colten here. He's a really good guy. He's very transparent, open, and honest about things, which I appreciate. And I'm just very appreciative also that he made the drive all the way from Nebraska to come and record the audiobook in this episode, and for being the first kind of guinea pig for this venture. I'm hoping it'll be the first of many. So enjoy. Here we go. All right, cheers.
Cheers.
You know, believe it or not, Colten, you are, I think, maybe only about the fifth or sixth person that's actually recorded a podcast in my studio.
Part of an elite group. How many brought beers with them?
You would be the first.
Hell yeah. First one, baby. Everyone else got to step up their game. Yeah,
you're by far now the favorite guest that I've had in my studio, just because you brought beer.
It's a low bar, but I'll take it.
It's it's a good bar to set. It's fine. I appreciate you coming down, though, man. I mean, like we were talking earlier, I'm stoked that for once I didn't actually have to make like an 8 or 9 hour plus drive just to make some recordings happen and other stuff. I'm pretty stoked that like somebody actually came to me, and you know, like I said, you're not the first person that's made a long drive for this, but being you're the first person that made a long drive plus brought beer, man, it's just icing on the cake.
Yeah, well, thank you for your hospitality here too. It's been fun. We went out flying earlier today and are going out tomorrow morning too. So we've been mixing all the fun and work along together.
Well, we'll see what happens tomorrow. I don't know how much you fed your bird earlier. I'm hoping that with the temperature dropping again tonight and everything, I'm hoping that maybe both of our birds fly less like ass than what they did earlier today.
That's okay. We both got humbled a little bit, and that's not the end of the world.
It wouldn't, yeah. Well, it won't be the first time. Definitely wasn't the first time. Definitely won't be the last time. You know, like I said, we pulled out the the book of excuses, and I know for me it was the increase in temperature. For you, it was what, the 9-hour drive.
Yeah. Along with a few other excuses I may have added to the list here or there.
Yeah, I mean, it's all good. The guest gets to have the excuse. It's fine. But yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun having you. I appreciate you making the drive, and Southern Indiana isn't exactly a tourist attraction by any stretch, but this is where we're at, and we do have some bunnies, we do have some squirrels, so we did get your bird at least some slips today anyway.
And eastern Nebraska also isn't worldwide known as a tourist trap, so I totally get you, and we're both in the same boat.
Yeah. Well, you didn't really miss out on too much back home having to come down here, did you?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And besides, my wife's out of town, nothing family-wise this weekend. It was a good weekend to come down.
Yeah, good. Well, this is one of the few things that's happened recently that just happened to work out and be like good circumstance-wise. Yeah, I'm having to try and figure out now how I can get my truck in to get fixed after hitting a deer 2 nights ago on top of a crappy week of work. This has been a nice change of pace for an otherwise just overall crummy week. So this has been it's been nice. It's been productive. But let's just go ahead and talk a little bit though why you even came down here in the first place. What are we doing here?
Yeah, we came down here so that we could record an audiobook with you. And so I wrote a book this past summer, The Philosophy and Ethics of Falconry. And I sent a copy to you before it was published so that you could, both give your thoughts on it, copy edit it a little bit, things like that. And you were able to provide some thoughts, and you sent it around to friends around here to also get their thoughts on it, which I very much appreciated. Provided a blurb for the back, which was very nice. And the book came out November 1st, I believe, was the first time it was available for sale. And it's been an interesting journey learning how to publish a book for the first time, putting it out there in the world. And definitely it was a unique experience to start recording an audiobook for the first time.
Well, let's discuss that a little bit. I always like having artists and authors and people like that on the podcast because I always like finding out why. Why would people do that to themselves? I know what I have to go through on a weekly basis just to continue to make this podcast happen. And this is like my purpose or my like artistic endeavor in that way or whatever. I know what goes in to a lot of these different things. And so one of the things that I like finding out about is what motivates people to say, I should write a falconry book, or I should write a book period, or I should do this or that or whatever. I mean, what was the main motivation for you to did you just wake up one day and say, I just want to punish myself and write a...
I think that's a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast probably wake up and say, how do I punish myself today? But no, what kind of the impetus for the book is one, I finally felt like I had something to say simply because, as I explained a little bit in the book, it's a very niche topic, right? And a lot of falconry books, pretty much all of them, at least touch on ethics. All of the exams that people take to become a falconer touch on ethics, but there wasn't a lot written about philosophy and ethics and how it relates to the sport. And I was uniquely situated simply because of my day job of being a teacher and a debate coach. And most of that stuff has to do with philosophy. And so I've read a bunch of philosophy in the past. And when I became a falconer, I was just constantly thinking about those connections. And so I wanted to maybe explain some of those connections I saw and kind of connect it back to some of the old philosophical traditions that I was aware of. And so I think that is one of the biggest barriers with a book is just, do I have something different to say? And so many book ideas that I've had have died because I was just like, no, that's already out there. And I can't bring myself to be essentially echoing other people. If I really don't think there's anything there, I'm just not going to write it. I'm not going to say it. I felt like there was enough of an opening with this that it would be worthwhile. And then I also had the opportunity this past summer where I was taking a graduate level writing class. And a lot of people in that class were just writing, anything they wanted, little side projects, short stories, poems, essays, things like that. But for the most part, they were, throwing away what they wrote afterwards. I don't think anyone was really doing anything with it. If I was going to be at a writing class for a couple of weeks, getting a good start on a project, I wanted to finish it and do something with it. So that was kind of also the practical end of this, is that I had a good start on it after having a real reason to sit down and write for a couple of weeks and get feedback from people who were other writers, none of whom were falconers, by the way. All of my very first readers were college and high school writing teachers. And so they found the content really interesting, but also just gave me a little bit of an insight into how does this read for someone who's not at all familiar with our world and has no idea about the practical realities of falconry. So that part was interesting, and it was good to get their viewpoint on it.
Well, and I imagine it was a different viewpoint, being able to get like kind of somebody's input or critique that knew absolutely nothing whatsoever about what we do and what the rigors are of what we do at all. And just starting that, like getting that as your baseline to start from with your just overall, your just overall layout of your book, your ideas and the foundation to build that on. I imagine that was probably, it's definitely a different way to approach it for sure.
I think one thing that I haven't told you so far is I also sent it to a Harvard philosophy professor who specializes in, animal ethics, and I believe is perhaps in their own life a vegetarian or vegan. But I was just curious what they thought of it. I never heard back from them. So I'm going to guess the feedback wouldn't have been too positive.
Yeah,
but
probably not.
I was interested. I wondered, what is this person going to say?
Yeah. I imagine they probably just saw it and was just like, went straight to probably the trash bin.
Oh, yeah. Along with most emails that they probably get.
Probably. But whatever. Yeah, I doubt that you probably would have gotten too much of substance from that anyway.
I got more helpful feedback from the people who did respond, and I was more interested in feedback from falconers and people who also knew the practical realities of things.
It's your market anyway. You're you're not making this, you're not writing a book like this or coming up with a concept like this for vegans,
No. That's partially my own curiosity is, what would be the sort of response, especially because there's a chapter in there that's responding to critics of falconry. And I was curious, what is the more critical perspective? Not to say that we would ever reach a point of agreement, but I was curious nonetheless to hear if there was going to be a person responding in good faith.
I would liken it more to putting a video up on YouTube and then proceeding to read the comments.
Yeah, I guess if you could curate the comments to one particular person, yeah. I don't know if maybe I should put this up on r/vegan or something and see what the general consensus on the book is.
It would be fascinating to see the response of this kind of topic from someone that supposedly is supposed to be in a center for like super higher learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like also has these built-in biases too that already exist. So I get it.
I did actually talk to someone who in their own personal life is vegan and vegetarian about it, but they are also a very open-minded person and understands, and they're interested in what I do with this. And they weren't at all harsh or critical of the arguments. They just found it interesting. And they said, well, yeah, that sounds like a great thing to do. So they're a wonderful person to hang around, but they weren't too critical of the project.
Yeah, and to that end, there's friends that I have, friends and acquaintances both that I have, that are very pro. I wouldn't say they're not vegan, but they're very like certain pro animal rights
Mm-hmm.
and pro animal rights, things like that, and certain they kind of live in that realm, right? And they know what I do. And their first response was, when they found out about what I do, was, man, there's a lot of aspects of this that goes against a lot of my fundamental like beliefs. But man, it's really cool.
I'm glad they're able to recognize that intuition,
Yeah.
and see that connection.
Well, and most of the friends that I have in even my acquaintance circles, like they're there for a reason. I can't allow people in my life anymore that is going to be a source of just constant like consternation or, just I can only take so much anymore, man.
We all can only take so much negativity. You got to select for that in your friend groups.
Yeah, there's only so much room that I have anymore and patience that I have anymore for just, I think that every person to some degree has certain things that they like doing that someone else in this world is going to deem either to be controversial or they don't agree with it or whatever the case is. So people are allowed to think what they want to think. I've got a lot of friends that believe certain things that I don't agree with, but I accept it, and I accept the fact that they're fundamentally good people, Otherwise, I wouldn't be friends with them, you know. But
Yeah.
at the same time, they don't give me extra crap about the things that I do that they don't agree with, and vice versa. So
It would be so uninteresting to live a life where you were so concerned about living a life that was unbothersome to everyone. Like, it'd be so sanitized. You would only be coloring inside the line so much. I can't imagine trying to use that as my meter stick for what am I doing, because I would end up very unhappy in that situation.
it would be so incredibly boring. So incredibly boring. And what are you going to learn from that? I mean, if everybody all liked the same stuff, had the same interests.
One thing I wrote that we recorded today was, part of the reason why morality and ethics is interesting is because you can fail at it. You can be unethical, and that's part of what makes it worthwhile trying to achieve. The risk of failing and being unethical makes something interesting. The risk of messing it up in some fundamental way and that mattering, like, that makes something better and more interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's always a constant battle. And I've actually had a couple of conversations very recently with other close friends about, what is ethical or not, or technically unlawful or not, or whatever, when it comes to the pursuit of game and the gray area that exists there. Because whenever you're hunting with another animal to hunt another animal, it's like, well, if they're doing a particular thing and they're in pursuit of a particular quarry, you're not going to be able to keep them from going after that quarry under certain circumstances. So, okay, technically speaking, sure, if a game warden or somebody came along and didn't agree with what you were doing, could they technically write you a ticket for something like that? Technically, I guess by the letter of the law, sure, but you can't just yell up at your red tail to not go after something it saw go into something because, it wants to catch its next meal, and so it's always this kind of like riding this razor's edge or this fine line of, these different, topics, I guess, in regards to, are we doing something wrong? Are we doing something right?
Philosophers love thought experiments, which are, these neatly packaged little stories to try to illustrate something that's either ethical or unethical. And one of the things that our birds are best at is completely shattering any attempt at making a neat little story and making a thought experiment, because real life always interrupts. And suddenly you're in a completely novel situation, or you're in an unexpected situation. One that comes up a lot for me that I try to avoid, is property lines, in my area. And I try best to keep to, the places I have permission. But, one thing our birds don't understand is property lines. And so I'll either call my bird back from an area where we're not supposed to be, or, I've occasionally ventured a little bit too far probably than what I was supposed to, in the interest of, doing my also due diligence to the bird of maybe they saw something there, and I am trying to weigh, how much of a problem am I being for a landowner versus like, what is my obligation to this bird? And I don't know always what the perfect balance of that is, but it's one that is at least a situation where I'm trying to balance those interests, and there's no perfect way to answer it, at least in my view. But, that's one that I encounter quite a bit.
Yeah. And there's always something that you can, if you take it far enough in your analysis, you can always get to either the bad or the good, as far as, whether or not you're doing something right or wrong, good or bad, or whatever, you can always psychoanalyze something in regards to our particular sport or our particular pastime. There's always things that you can always think after the fact, well, that could be construed as this, or that could be construed as that, or whatever. But what I think people forget is these are, once they leave the glove, they're completely pretty much independent animals, and they do what they want. And you're just kind of along for the ride. So I think it's interesting that people are motivated to do certain things, and I'm happy that you decided to broach this topic, and because you're right. I mean, there's not really very many, if any, written works out there that kind of cover this topic to, I think, the degree that you do. And it's not like your book is like a super long book, but it's long enough that I think it provides a pretty good foundation. And not everybody, is kind of like what I wrote for your blurb or whatever, is there's a lot of falconers that are coming into the sport now that unfortunately I don't think are getting the guidance that they should be getting firsthand continually through their apprenticeship. And people can agree or disagree with me on that if they want, but I've seen it enough firsthand that there's a lot of apprentices out there that are either not getting a lot of the guidance they should be getting, or whatever the case is, that there's definitely a room for something like this that is going to help people at least, I don't know, maybe think a little bit more about what they're doing, because they're not getting that like that little, angel isn't on their shoulder saying, you might want to double check that, or you might want to think about that again before you do that, because there's a lot of people that just don't know the difference. It
is good to have that helpful reminder. And I think just starting that discourse, even if people don't agree with every single line I wrote in the book, having that discourse in and of itself is valuable. At least getting them to deliberate about it and getting people to critically analyze their own positions, think, why do I do it this way? Or why do I have these assumptions? Just thinking more about that is valuable. And that's kind of what I see a book doing. It's not like a final treatise to put out there into the world as a definitive dead thing. It's a sort of living, ongoing discussion.
Sure. Well, and to that end, your sponsor that kind of wrote the foreword kind of touched on it briefly, and I just want to hear from you what your thoughts personally are about it. I want to hear you express it yourself. There's a lot of egos in our sport, and there's a lot of opinions in our sport. And in falconry, it's really inundated with a lot of people that think a lot of different things. And to that end, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that think that, say maybe second year apprentice or going into their first year general or whatever, probably doesn't have much business writing a book about any topic whatsoever. So what would you say to someone that would come up to you, for example, and be like, well, why do you think that you're even remotely qualified to write a book about a topic like this whenever you haven't hardly even been involved in it for any length of time? I already know the answer to this, but I want people to hear it from you, what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you thought my answer would be, just because I think my answer is, well, one, fair critique, right? But in terms of this book, it's not a how-to book. I would not write that book. And even if I spent a few decades more in the sport, I don't think that that's a book I'm interested in writing. This is, on the question of ethics and philosophy that, well, one, I do think I have quite a bit of a background in that. And that's kind of what I was bringing to the table, is I do not have decades of practical experience in our sport, but I have quite a bit of time in thinking about these sort of ethical and philosophical issues and these traditions in a way that I think a lot of falconers maybe don't, right? And so I'm bringing in a new framework to discuss that. Next, kind of like how I was saying, I don't think that this is necessarily a way for me to implore people to change their minds. I'm not saying a bunch of people think X and I think they're all wrong. Let me like change their opinion. I think if that was maybe the tone or the approach, I could see that rubbing people more the wrong way. But I was more like, here are all of the positions that maybe we oftentimes all say together as a sport are our position. Now, why do we think that? And part of it was a response to people, again, who don't agree with the ethics of our sport at all. How could it be justified? I think one thing that all of us falconers could probably agree to is that our sport is a good thing to do. It's worth doing. And I think having someone, lay out a defense of it to other people who may disagree with it is a worthwhile thing to do. Mm-hmm. And speaking to those criticisms is, I think, something I was positioned well to do. I don't know how much we've talked about it. Part of my, side job or things I have experience with is coaching debate, doing things like that. And so offering a defense or rebuttal is something I'm familiar with. And so, yeah, I get the criticism of people maybe saying this person doesn't have a lot of practical experience. And I would tell them to still engage with the text on its own terms. Maybe let me know what their thoughts are, but it's ultimately meant to be a part of a discussion, get them to think more about the ethics and the philosophy that undergird some of the things they already think, and then to offer, a little bit of insight into the literature and thinking of stuff that they may not have read that still has things to say about the practice they already do.
Sure. And yeah, I just wanted people to be able to hear it straight from you. I agree. I mean, we had this conversation, whenever you first approached me to even read the manuscript initially and everything. I've already kind of gotten your thoughts on it. And I think that something else that, people need to be aware of too is kind of something else that we discussed earlier while we were at dinner and stuff, was this isn't necessarily just written for falconers either. Mm-hmm. And some of your initial, some of your other criticism, I should say, some of your other feedback that you've gotten that has also been positive has also been from people that aren't even doing what we do. Mm-hmm. And so, to that end, well, my thoughts on this whole topic. Like, part of the reason why you made an addendum to one of your chapters and stuff was because of experiences that I've had that I gave you input on and everything. Lord knows there's plenty of falconers out there, especially, that could use a brush brush up or an extra lesson in ethics. We all have situations in which we are going to be tested to make potentially the right or wrong decision in a certain circumstance. That being said, there's a lot of instances in which the decision shouldn't be that hard. And it's astounding to me how many times I know that I've seen people make the wrong decision in situations that should have been, quite frankly, very common sense. So my response in your shoes to that, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to have a little bit of back and forth on this too, was common sense shouldn't be that hard in regards to some of these topics. And so I think that there's something for a little bit of everybody to learn from a book like this, not just falconers. And also, number two, like, it doesn't take a wealth of experience in a field necessarily to write a book about, some things that should just be common sense. But it's amazing how many people don't get that initial guidance these days.
That's fair. And I also think how many books out there are written by folks who perhaps have far less experience, than I've kind of been blessed and cursed to be in fields like teaching and in falconry where the norm is to gain a couple of decades of experience. There are a ton of fields and topics out there where people maybe research them for a couple weeks and they're like, oh, I'm good to write a book about this. How many self-help books are out there from people who have the most cursory understanding of the, literature base they're talking about, but, they're writing a book about it. So I think that there has been some due diligence, in terms of learning about it. And like you said, it's not a tome, right? This is not an exhaustive book about any ethical issue that has ever come up. And maybe as the years goes on, if I gain more perspective on an issue, I'll write about it either in another book format or, write essays on it and continue to learn and grow. I'm definitely not seeing this as a static text that will never change over time.
Yeah, and I think that's a good attitude to have. I think that anybody that thinks that they are basically producing like a be-all, end-all product right off the bat, and especially this kind of a topic or a field or whatever is kind of, kind of unrealistic.
Yep.
I mean, that's kind of the whole point is, to be able to produce something that, you knowing up front that you will never completely 100% know. And we all grow. I mean, we all continually change in our viewpoints and stuff too. So especially in a topic like this, I think that it's smart of you to put something out there and just being upfront and open and honest about, hey, like there's definitely room for improvement and adjustments and even changes in like my own personal viewpoint for something like this too. So
with a topic like this, if I ever waited for my views to solidify, I'd either be dead or I probably have, outlived my usefulness because I've gotten too stuck in my ways to make it worthwhile. Yeah. I think recognizing that you just need to put something down on paper and put it out there, but that it won't be definitive is just like a natural and healthy attitude to have about it.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, whenever you initially approached me about my feedback about all this stuff, I was very upfront with you in that, there's just so many opinions and there's just so many like personal viewpoints about a lot of this stuff. What one person thinks is fine is going to be what another person thinks is just like the devil, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so a topic like this, I told you initially was going to be like, man, this is going to be maybe possibly a little bit of a hard sell for you just because everybody already has an idea in their mind of what is right and wrong, what they want to personally go by for their own personal like moral code and stuff. But at the same time, I also thought about it a little bit more and realized that there's still a lot of people coming into this venture that have very little guidance. There's still a lot of the whole like paper sponsor stuff going on and everything. They don't really have a whole lot of initial guidance in a lot of those regards. So I think that especially for the newer up and coming people, there's definitely room for, a book like this. So like I said, man, I just wanted to touch on these things so that people could hear straight from you kind of what your thoughts were and your just overall train of thought and the inspiration and putting this out there and all that stuff. And that being said, I mean, having read it, and I mean, I think that there's something that everybody, it's not just for beginners. I mean, there's something that people can take away from it, even people that don't know a whole lot about philosophy and some of the other types of things in there. And you go a little bit more in depth too about some of the different types of, just I don't, like I said, there's information in there that can be gleaned for people that don't even know a whole lot about, some of the different background in philosophy and stuff too. So
I think that also made me feel better when it came to writing it, because when I put it out there, even to people I didn't know beforehand, like we didn't know each other very much when I sent this to you. I'd basically, I just said, hey, read this. Same thing with a couple other people I sent it to, or other people who I knew would give me honest feedback. And I didn't hear a lot of, overtly negative responses. I just heard, oh, maybe talk more about this issue, maybe talk more about that issue, tweak how you're talking about this one thing. There was no outright rejection of the project that I think helped me a little bit with recognizing that most people are going to approach it with a relatively open mind, or at least enough people are going to approach it with an open mind that it's worth putting out there.
Yeah. And I admire anybody personally that's willing to put themselves out there a little bit for something like a project they believe in, like this, in which, I mean, there's all kinds of room to be critiqued, shredded, basically just, whatever, more or less just crushed into oblivion and stuff. Like I said, anytime you put yourself out there in any regard, doesn't matter if it's a book, doesn't matter if it's a painting, doesn't matter if it's a podcast, whatever the situation is, there's always room for people to just absolutely and totally not like it, crush you, whatever. And I always admire people that it doesn't really matter. Like, they firmly believe in something. They think something's worthwhile. They're going to put themselves out there. And there's a lot to be said for those kind of people that believe in something to that point that, they're willing to brave that, So my hat's off to you. I mean, I do think it's a worthwhile book to have out there. I think it was well written. Actually, I mean, somewhat jokingly, I remember telling you initially that you might want to maybe dumb some of this down a little bit, because I was reading some of it and just thinking, well, I more or less understand some parts of this, but I'm sitting there thinking how much people are really going to be able to digest in some of the, especially talking about some of the terms, philosophical terms and stuff that you delve into and everything. But overall, I think it was a pretty well written book, especially for your first go at it. And I'm glad that you decided to broach the topic, because there's been a lot of situations that I've run into over the years that people, if nothing else, could use a subtle reminder that certain things just really aren't cool.
Yeah, there's certainly those areas where perhaps the gray area falls apart, and it's just like, well, no, we do have an answer to this,
Mm-hmm.
And also, you've given me a great idea with negative feedback that we can do a fun drinking game with 1-star Amazon reviews if those ever start to come through. We'll crack open more beers and do some sort of dramatic reading of the worst Amazon reviews we get.
I guess now would be a good time, though, since we've already talked some about the inspiration and just the motivation behind you writing this book and everything. What exactly got you motivated to even get into falconry in the first place? We haven't covered that yet, so we need to definitely talk about that.
Yeah. And that's where I think a lot of these podcasts start, right? Is a sort of, where did you get motivated to do falconry? And I guess for me, it was a couple of years ago, and I was just thinking about how do I get more connected with nature, because I've always been an outdoorsman. All of the men in my family have gotten obsessed with or really into some aspect of being an outdoorsman. The dedication in the book is to both my father and to my grandfather, who were outdoorsmen, kind of general outdoorsmen, like they did everything growing up. you name something related to hunting, fishing, etc., trapping, we were out there doing it. So I kind of got a little bit of a taste of everything, excluding falconry. I'd never gotten any experience in that. And I was thinking about where I live now. I live in the middle of a capital city in Lincoln. I was trying to think of what I would have good opportunities to do and pursue consistently. I was thinking of how do I get out a lot? What are things that might really facilitate that? And I don't know what hit me one night in bed, but I just decided to look up like Nebraska falconry. Like I knew that this was a sport. I knew that it existed, but I needed to learn more about it. As I was thinking about what are things that would get me more out in nature and connected, which was an impetus I had, like a feeling I had to connect more to that. And so I found the Nebraska Falconry page for our Game and Parks Commission. I emailed the person in charge of, falconry for Nebraska Game and Parks and asked for book recommendations. That's how I started. It's a very English teacher thing to do, is say, what are book recommendations you have? I read a few of those. I reached back out and said, I've read a few of these. Can I get out in the field, or can you give me a list of emails of people around here who do this, who would be interested in maybe talking to me? And I got a list of emails. My now sponsor got back to me and was like, hey, I'm going out. Do you want to join? I said, absolutely. So I went out with him, and we're kind of two peas in a pod. We're both rather, I'm a little bit ambivert, a little bit more outgoing, perhaps, insofar as if two of us are going to ask permission on a new property, I'm probably more likely to do it. But, both like reading a lot. I would like to think thoughtful people. And I spent a lot of time with him, going out with him and his bird, and, just kind of kept going from there. Did every step of the process after that. But it really was kind of just an intuition I followed, which was, I want to get out in nature more. I want to pursue my interests in hunting, fishing, etc. in a new way. How do I do that? And for whatever reason, this came to mind, and I kind of just followed that instinct.
It's a different way to fall into it. Just kind of laying in bed one day and thinking that,
It was literally in bed. I remember I was in bed, Googled on my phone, Nebraska Falconry, and started that whole process from there, and decided to read books on the topic after that. Kind of makes sense, I guess, for a guy who ended up writing a book about the philosophy of it, is sit there and thinking about it, and just popping into my mind.
Yeah. And you've only really been in this a couple years, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Second year apprentice.
Yeah.
And so a lot to learn. As we were talking about on the drive, I don't think that feeling will ever go away, but
if it does, then there's something weird going on.
Something real weird.
Yeah.
I try to keep a healthy attitude about it, I was chatting with you while we were out today, asking you questions, because I'm always learning new things, chatting with your buddy Mark and getting his insight and perspective on things. I liked it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it's all about. Especially once you get past your apprenticeship, once you become a general and everything, that's whenever you really start to kind of, I don't know. There's certain things that, I want to say traps or whatever, but like, there's just, it's like this whole other world opens up, and if you don't keep yourself kind of reined in a little bit, you can fall into that trap of wanting to do too many things at once and all this kind of crap. And I just, like I said, I will never be one to sit and ever remotely think that I know even anywhere close to anything about anything when it comes to all this. Just when I think I've started to kind of figure something out, I find out it's not the case. I really wish that, in a way, we would just kind of redo our system, do kind of like the grade system, kind of like South Africa does in a lot of regards, because I hate the term master. when it comes to a license.
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody, I don't care what anybody says. Nobody's ever going to be a master at any of this. Like, it's impossible.
You're not the first person I've heard that's expressed trepidation regarding that term.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right that anything with 4,000 to 6,000 years behind it and anything international, good luck in one lifetime
It's impossible.
ever getting to any level of mastery. And that's, I think, something that we all just have to grapple with and come to is approach it with a certain level of humility.
Yeah, and humility is a great word. I mean, as you saw today, even whenever you think that you're doing all the right things, and even when all the stars align, there's something that can go wrong. There's nothing that says that this animal that you have in your possession is going to act right. And I say the word right in quotations.
Yep.
Because they can do whatever they want. As soon as they leave the glove, do whatever they want. There's nothing that says that whatever happens is going to be something that you like. You hope. You hope that you're doing the right things. But like I said, I don't care what anybody says. There's always room for improvement. There's always something else to learn. So,
I think one of the only ways people could discredit themselves when talking to me is if someone came up to me and said, I know everything about the sport that's ever been said. I know all the right things. I would just be very skeptical of that person, I will listen to just about anyone and what they have to say. But I find that humility to be almost a prerequisite to gain credibility with me.
I would put more stock into the term master. And this is just me talking. This is my own personal observation and opinion. I would put the term master in a lot more higher esteem, I think, if there were more that went into achieving that title on a license than just time.
Years, yeah.
And
because it's easy to perhaps coast in anything for several years.
Well, it is. I mean, you could theoretically have someone that's flown one red tail for 10 years that technically would be eligible to become a master.
Fly one time per season, call it good. Yeah.
I mean, as long as they have a bird in their possession for X amount of months for consecutive years. I don't know. Maybe I'm just, maybe I've actually reached a point now where I can, become a grumpy old man when it comes to this kind of stuff. I don't know, but that's just my personal opinion. I've seen a lot of really competent falconers. I've been very fortunate, and I still consider 10 years to be a very short amount of time. And, I've also had the good fortune to see a lot of different people from a lot of different aspects or different parts of the world fly birds. And I just don't understand how anybody could even remotely think that they are ever a master. Just all the different things, it's too much.
I mean, to make a comparison to my day job of teaching, I've now spent a couple years in falconry. This is my 6th year of teaching, not including student teaching, all that stuff I did beforehand. This is my, I believe, a decade of debate coaching, being a head coach of that, or at least coaching in some regard for 10 years. In those other ventures of my life, I have nowhere near everything figured out. And so just extrapolating, look to year 6, year 8, year 10, year 12, etc., couple decades in. If falconry keeps going like the other things in my life that I've paid a lot of time and attention to and still feel no level of mastery over, even if I've improved and grown and learned a lot from, I think that will probably hold true, that a certain level of mastery will be unattainable, even no matter the levels of improvement, which doesn't mean that I'm not still going to seek improvement. It just means I need to always stay humble, keep learning.
Well, and I think that anybody that's truly honest with themselves and truly humble would agree. For
Maybe
sure.
the people on early levels of Dunning-Kruger effect, maybe not too sure if they've got it all figured out. They're the best that there can be.
I don't know. I hope that as more and more people continue to come into this, that there's at least some degree of a continued aspect of the whole humble thing that continues to. I personally kind of worry a little bit that people that are going to continue to come into this are going to get a little bit more disconnected with the fact that this is not something that they can just for granted to have all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's a lot of things that could be improved upon when it comes to just people's overall awareness that are coming into all this, just knowing that this is not something that is easy to maintain. And I don't mean like their personal falconry. I mean like falconry for everybody, the whole system. So
we were just out today, and this is only one small part of it. I know you're talking about, the legality of it and everything, but a poignant metaphor for that is today we went to a field where probably 80% of it had been bulldozed and made into apartments,
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of fleetiness of those fields, a fantastic productive field one day could be bulldozed the next. And that's a sort of thing to keep in mind when it comes to everything regarding our sport, whether it be the legality of it, the capacity of us to continue doing it in any way. It's something I see a lot. An Aldo Leopold quote was something goes along the lines of, ecological education is noticing scars, noticing damage. And I think maybe your ecological education just is continuing as you see some of these things that are dangers up ahead.
Agreed. Indeed. Very much so. And out of curiosity, just before we kind of start to wrap up a little bit, I am curious. One of the things I do like to talk to newer falconers about, though, just because, I don't know, it's somewhat for my own personal amusement, but also because it's a nostalgia factor. I remember thinking back in my first couple of years what I wanted to do and what my goals were and everything. I mean, you've flown the same red tail now for a couple of seasons, pretty much, right?
Yep. I'm going to release her this spring, try a new one next year. Ideally, I've flown a female for 2 seasons now. I'm looking forward to flying probably a male to just get some variety,
They're, especially if you're hunting rabbits, I think they're way better, personally.
I've seen some male red tails fly, and I think you're probably right about that. But nonetheless, it's been a good learning experience to kind of see that firsthand.
Yeah. Well, and so another red tail is the next step for you. You don't want to try another. Well, you said, I guess, as an apprentice, you can only have red tails in Nebraska, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Are you going to be able to upgrade to general after next season?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay. So you don't have any other. So far, you don't have any other kind of whims or inclinations to try anything other than another red tail?
Oh, lots of whims. Lots and lots of whims. I'll tell you what, one good thing about coming here, and part of the reason why I love seeing different places and different birds fly, is I am dedicated to my home and where I live. There was actually a time last year where my wife and I were thinking about moving all the way to, the DC metro area, Virginia, Maryland, that sort of thing, which would have completely thrown me for a loop in terms of like my complete ecological understanding of what's going on there. But we're now pretty dedicated to living in Lincoln, Nebraska, Eastern Nebraska, that sort of place. I'm figuring out what works best for there and what I can fly in that place that works really well. I'm interested in trying micros of various kinds, flying a kestrel, flying a Sharpie, flying a Merlin potentially. After seeing a couple goshawks fly this weekend, I think I would struggle, honestly, with our terrain and getting it good slips. Just based on our experience today. I fly not in nearly as urban and mode environments, open fields, very much, riparian, where they can jump back into the woods sort of place. I think that I would maybe struggle with, getting the flushes I need. Someone's listening to this and saying, I could make it work.
Well,
I'm sure you do. I'm talking for myself here. I have interest in, trying Harris's hawks at some point. If I moved a little bit out west at any point for any reason, western Nebraska, central Nebraska has some good long winging, actually. Like I said, whims and interest in just about everything. But I'm going to try to approach it with a little bit more of a conservative mindset and keep flying probably passage red tails for a while trying to introduce every once in a while a new experience into that and try to do it well, learn from it. But yeah, I'm trying to stay grounded and have dreams at the same time. And that's a tough thing to balance.
Well, it's a smart approach, because I was definitely one of those people that once I got my general and I wanted to do all the things.
Yep. I totally understand that. Yeah.
I wanted to try a little bit of everything. And had I known better what I should have done, and I've stated this before on record, had I known better, I would have just flown red tails on squirrels for year after year, and just
part of the good thing about having friends too is you can go out with them flying and get to see those other birds. Yeah. And so that's one of the things I appreciated this weekend. I got to see birds fly that weren't my own, but guess what? Those birds go home with other people, and I don't have to, worry about day after day, producing slips for them and flying them.
There are certain species that I can definitely tell you it's one thing to watch them fly for years, year after year. It's one thing to watch certain species fly year after year, so on and so forth. But until you actually have the firsthand experience to some degree of flying certain types of birds, you can't fully appreciate what goes into it. And you think you can get a decent idea. I'm not saying you can't get educated at all about what might or might not work for you personally and your personal preferences and what works for your personality and everything. But once again, I mean, I've seen goshawks fly for a decade now. Easy. But this is the first year I've actually tried flying one for myself.
Yeah, you were talking about that experience and how it was going for you.
Yeah, and you will find out really quick whether or not your personal suspicions were wrong or they're totally confirmed,
Yep.
That being said, sometimes you're pleasantly surprised, sometimes you're not. Alls I know is there's no substitute. Like, this was a good year in reaffirmation for me that there's no substitute whatsoever for personal, firsthand experience with certain things. And it goes a long way to really reminding you that, hey, it's okay to not like to do certain things. Like, you don't have to do everything. I think it's cool that you have a very realistic approach to what you want to do, because it's very easy, if you let yourself, to kind of fall into that trap of wanting to do too many different things in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, period. It's very easy, and also one thing that I'm actively trying to push back against. Not that I don't want to try new things, but I want to give them the serious effort that they need to actually know, okay, is this confirming my suspicions? Am I giving this a fair shake, basically? And I would like to give everything a fair shake.
Well, and that's fair too, because there's other things that I've seen personally that I wanted to see firsthand before I made a judgment. And there's definitely certain things that I've seen for myself that after I saw them, I was like, nope, I can tell you right now, I will have zero fun doing that personally for me.
It's good to follow that intuition.
Yeah. And there's always those things. But, I do you even have, I can't remember. Did you say you even have upland game where you're at?
We do have upland game. You're talking upland birds?
Yeah. I mean, like quail, pheasant, like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess I don't even know if you could consider quail, but I mean, I know you said your pheasant populations are kind of dwindling some, but like,
yeah.
I mean, do you have quail and other stuff too there also?
Yeah, I see quail probably over 50% of the times I'm out flushing rabbits. I accidentally kick up a covey of quail, and they're not our target species, but we make our attempts on them. Like we were saying, only a couple pheasants per season, so I don't think I can make a real good show of any of that. Once you get out into central western Nebraska, the grouse and prairie chickens are actually serviceable numbers, but I'm pretty dedicated to eastern Nebraska, so it would be mostly going after either waterfowl of various kinds and shorebirds, or quail and maybe the occasional pheasant.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in your position, it would be hard not to just go completely like the long winging route. And especially if you had stuff close to you, but you're close enough to also make like short little jaunts into different parts of the state to do grouse and other stuff. Like, it would be hard not to do that, I think.
It is tempting to, do some waterfowling with a long wings around while also making the trip out not very far west and getting, some good flights in. I shot a prairie chicken in my parents' backyard this past season. I just went out with my shotgun, and, there were a couple dozen prairie chickens hanging around, and just got one. And that's an experience I definitely don't take for granted. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, and I guess this would be a good time just talking about experiences. I mean, in just your short time in falconry, what's been one of your more memorable hunting experiences or flights or whatever the case is? I mean,
I think just, it's not any given flight, but I really gained an appreciation for a day where we had success and she caught something, but we flew on in that day quail, squirrels, and rabbits, like all in one day. We were making an honest effort at all of them. I think we went home that day with, that's been a couple of days that come to mind, but either a squirrel or a rabbit generally. But just the variety. And, I've seen so many cool things while out. Just seeing, the different creatures of Nebraska. One time I kicked up a herd of like 30 whitetail that were all hanging out in one spot. I love when I have to wait a minute for the fat raccoon to get out of the tree pile I ended up kicking. Those have been the most memorable things. It's not necessarily any given catch we had, but just like seeing. I've learned so much too about the plants of the place I call home, the weather and seasonal patterns of the place I call home. I feel more Nebraskan and more tied to the place where I've known my whole life through this. And I don't think I would have gotten that if not for falconry. I think that it's really tied me into a sense of place, tied me into a sense of home. And that's something that is probably the biggest takeaway I've had so far. And those days where we get a variety of flights on, 3 or 4 different quarry species, hell, even when she catches like a deer mouse or whatnot, I wouldn't have known the difference between a deer mouse and a field mouse or like a, house mouse before I started falconry, because I had no reason to care about like the different kinds of mice. And I just learning that's been one of the coolest things.
Never seen a deer mouse. Didn't even know it existed, honestly. So
they do. Yeah, they're cool. They do carry some diseases, but they're cute.
Fair enough. Well, I guess we can go ahead and come close to, I guess we can go ahead and wrap this up, man. Yeah. I do want to, as per my usual topics of conversation, I do want to, just from your point of view anyway, in your short time and all this, like get your personal piece of advice to anybody thinking about getting into this or currently in it. Just a sentiment, whatever you think you'd be worthy of passing along to current or prospective generations of falconers, and we can come close to ending on this, I guess.
Yeah, I know I've gained a lot from fostering relationships with people, deep relationships, either with a sponsor and with other people who can offer guidance and mentorship. That's been a huge thing. I think reading widely and deeply, read, kids, go home and get into that stuff. But really, I have gotten a lot out of that. And then stay humble.
It seems like every other outing, you can have one great day where you're like one up, one down, one flight you catch, and then the next day is just an absolute shit show.
Yeah.
You would think that wouldn't be a hard thing to remember.
Oh, but we're always fighting back against it, right?
All the time. And it's a continual source of consternation. Every time you think you've got these birds doing what you want, going your way, there's always something that happens eventually that reminds you that you really just only have so much control at all when it comes to all this stuff. You think you've got them going your way, then there's another day that happens, and that day is not a good day. So it's good advice, man. And I'm glad that you made it down. I'm glad that we're able to collaborate on this, make this happen. And I'm hoping that more people will kind of jump on board with this whole idea. I would like to fill this need that this particular niche that we live in, has, and continuing to offer more falconry audiobooks to people and stuff, and offer that as another something that may make it worthwhile to people to, that want to kind of continue to help support these endeavors and everything. And I appreciate you being willing to come down, make the drive, and spend part of the weekend. And Lord knows there's a lot better places than Southern Indiana that you could have gone to spend part of a weekend and hang out and stuff. So I appreciate you doing that.
Happy to be here, Jonathan. Thank you for having me. And for the next person, you better bring beers to one up me, or even something better.
Well, either that or something stronger than beer. I mean,
I've got more in the car if you want something else.
I've made it known that I'm also a rum guy. I do like my rum too.
Oh shit. Well, now the next person that knows what they need to bring. Okay, so go find some nice rum.
I'm happy to have you. Thanks for coming down this weekend, and this has been fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan.